How many times have you found yourself saying sorry just to calm everything down, even when you know you didn't actually cause the problem? Notice the cycle. You smooth things over, you take on extra responsibility, you explain and re explain your intentions. You bend because you care about the relationship. Meanwhile, she rarely sits with what she did. There's always an explanation, a context, a feeling that somehow makes her behavior land back on your shoulders. The more patient you are, the more that pattern repeats and the more you start to doubt your own reality. Most men are told that this keeps happening because they're too soft, too passive, not alpha enough. But the issue usually isn't weakness. You're operating in a social framework where men are expected to hold themselves to a high standard, while women are often protected from that same level of scrutiny. In that environment, kindness can turn into a liability. Direct honesty can feel like a risk. If you rock the boat, you're framed as the problem. If you stay quiet, you slowly disappear inside the relationship. On top of that, we've been sold a story about empowerment that sounds inspiring but quietly undermines accountability. The story goes like this. If you're empowered, you should never feel uncomfortable, never be questioned, never have to sit with the consequences of your choices. Any discomfort is painted as an attack. But real power doesn't work that way. Real power is being able to say, I made that decision. I chose that. I own what followed. False empowerment is wanting full freedom of choice while being shielded from what those choices create. Once you see that difference, a lot of confusing reactions start to make sense. If someone has been taught that empowerment means never feeling at fault, then any request for responsibility feels like an insult, not an invitation to grow. So when you calmly say, what happened there wasn't okay for me, she doesn't hear a simple observation. She hears an assault on her identity. It doesn't matter that your tone is steady and your words are measured. What matters is that the illusion of always being on the moral high ground just cracked. You've probably lived this. You bring up something that genuinely hurt you. You don't shout, you don't attack, you simply describe the moment. Within minutes, the whole thing flips. Suddenly, you're too sensitive. You're looking for a fight. Your attempt to name what happened is reframed as aggression. The facts of the situation get buried under reactions to your feelings. Nothing changed in your behavior. What changed was the power balance. The second accountability enters the room. The dynamic shifts from one-way protection to mutual responsibility, and that feels threatening to someone who's rarely been required to carry their share. This isn't usually driven by cruelty, it's driven by conditioning. If you grow up in a world that constantly protects your feelings first and examines your choices second, you start to equate accountability with attack. When that mindset sets in, being asked to own your part feels like oppression instead of maturity. And if you don't recognize that mechanism, you'll keep taking these reactions personally, apologizing for simply asking for fairness, and giving away more power each time. To understand why accountability can feel so foreign to some women, you have to look earlier than dating, sex, or adult relationships. You have to watch how boys and girls are often treated long before romance is on the radar. When a young boy messes up, the feedback he gets is usually straightforward. You did this, it caused that, don't do it again. The expectation is clear, fix it, learn from it, move differently next time. Embedded in moments like that is a lesson. Actions and outcomes are connected. And growing up means taking responsibility when you fall short. Contrast that with how a lot of girls are handled in similar situations. The tone softens. Explanations get longer. Adults spend more time describing how she felt than what she did. The response is often, well, she didn't mean it like that, or she was having a hard day. Her intentions are cushioned, her emotions are prioritized, and consequences are reduced or delayed. The behavior might get mentioned, but it's wrapped in so much emotional padding that the lesson lands very differently. The message becomes, discomfort should be eased first. Accountability can wait or be skipped. Over time, this shapes internal wiring. This isn't about anyone sitting down and saying she never has to take responsibility. It's subtler than that. When leniency becomes the default, it quietly teaches entitlement. When outcomes are softened or redirected, it trains avoidance. When a child learns that tears, distress, or shifting the story reduces pressure, those strategies get stored as effective tools. Psychologically, the brain keeps what works. If deflecting or collapsing emotionally means the heat turns down, those patterns become automatic. They don't feel manipulative from the inside. They feel like self-protection. Fast forward into adulthood, and you start to recognize familiar dynamics. A mistake happens, but a direct apology is hard to come by. Not because she didn't do anything, but because saying I was wrong feels unfamiliar and unsafe. When you try to talk about specific behavior, the conversation drifts away from what happened and into how your tone felt, how stressed she's been, how hurt she feels by even discussing it. The original issue doesn't vanish. It just gets buried under a pile of feelings, history, and side topics until it's unrecognizable. This is where a lot of men start questioning themselves. You sense something is off, but you can't clearly label it. You're not dealing with a cartoon villain. You're dealing with someone shaped by years of reinforcement that made accountability feel optional and discomfort feel unjust. You try harder to explain. You bring more logic, more detail, more patience. You think if you just say it the right way, it will finally land. But you're not wrestling with logic. You're colliding with conditioning. And conditioning doesn't usually unravel because someone presents a better argument. It changes when avoiding responsibility stops working. When excuses, emotional outbursts, or shifting the narrative no longer remove the pressure, the system is forced to adapt. Until that point, you can talk in circles for hours. You can be clear, kind, and incredibly reasonable, and still walk away feeling like the bad guy for simply wanting the truth acknowledged. Recognizing that you're up against long-term programming, not just miscommunication, keeps you from arguing yourself into exhaustion. Modern dating hasn't just changed how people meet. It's changed how people treat responsibility inside relationships. In a world where options seem endless, reflecting on your part in a conflict feels less necessary. Why look inward when swiping outward is so easy? When attention and validation are always a few taps away, the cost of messing up a relationship doesn't feel as heavy. The unconscious belief becomes, if this gets uncomfortable, there are other people waiting. I don't need to fix anything. I just need to move on. For many women today, especially those who are attractive or socially connected, replacement doesn't feel like a distant threat. It feels like a convenient backup plan. Social media, dating apps, and constant DMs create an illusion of abundance. When you know that validation is right there whenever you want it, urgency fades. Losing a good man still stings, but it doesn't feel final. There's a quiet voice in the background saying, you don't have to deal with this. You deserve better. You can find someone who won't question you. Dating apps amplify that voice. Every swipe becomes a micro message. Don't like this? Swap it. You're not encouraged to ask, how did I contribute to this problem? Instead, the question becomes, why should I stay if I'm unhappy? That sounds self-respecting on the surface, but often it's just polished avoidance. Accountability starts to look like tolerating discomfort while leaving looks like strength. Repairing, reflecting, and adjusting together feel outdated compared to the quick dopamine hit of new attention. You see this most clearly when a relationship hits its first real friction. Communication breaks down, expectations clash, boundaries surface. Instead of slowing down, owning their part, and working through it, some people jump straight to, maybe we're not compatible, or maybe I need someone who gets me without all this. Those statements can be true in some cases, but very often they're a disguise. Compatibility isn't defined in the smooth moments. It's revealed when things get hard and both people are asked to grow. In a culture of endless choice, self-correction doesn't feel urgent. Why examine your own blind spots when you can just reset the game with someone new who hasn't seen them yet? Why work through your defensiveness when there are plenty of people who will accept you without challenge, at least temporarily? Over time, this trains people to associate accountability with loss. Loss of comfort, loss of options, loss of ego. Responsibility starts to feel like a downgrade instead of a pathway to deeper respect. And that's where many decent men silently pay the price. When you consistently tolerate deflection, when you accept being blamed just to keep the peace, something subtle shifts. You become reliable but taken for granted, safe but not fully valued. The man who keeps absorbing what isn't his slowly stops being seen as a man with standards and starts being seen as a man who will always adjust. Respect rarely disappears in one big moment. It erodes in a series of small interactions where responsibility is dodged and you let it slide. By now, a pattern may be coming into focus. Not an accusation against all women, but a repeatable structure you'll notice in women who've learned that accountability is optional. Patterns matter because they show up again and again, even when everyone insists this time is different. When you stop treating each blow-up or blame shift as an isolated event and start seeing the design underneath, your confusion fades. You stop asking, why did this random thing happen? And start seeing, oh, this is the same loop playing out again. One pattern is attention prioritized over integrity. These women are deeply invested in being admired, validated, and seen as good, kind, or morally right. Wanting attention isn't the issue. What they're willing to trade for it is. When they mess up, acknowledging it openly dents the image they've built. So instead of facing the mistake directly, they manage perception. Apologies, if they arrive, are carefully worded, often private, and framed to protect how they're seen. When someone criticizes their behavior, the focus immediately shifts to how harsh, unfair, or unkind that criticism feels. The goal in that pattern isn't real repair, it's image control. Keeping the spotlight favorable matters more than addressing what actually happened. So a conversation about behavior turns into a conversation about how mean it is to bring it up. The criticism becomes the problem, not the action that triggered it. Over time, you learn that raising issues threatens the version of themselves they're trying to project, and they will defend that projection at the cost of truth. A second pattern is relationship sabotage through chasing what's low responsibility and high drama. There's a strong pull toward men who are emotionally unavailable, already taken, or clearly inconsistent. Why? Because those situations offer intense emotional highs with very little accountability. There are fewer real expectations and built-in excuses when it falls apart. He was never really mine, or it just wasn't meant to be. The setup itself absorbs the blame. There's no need to ask, why did I choose someone like that? When it's easier to say, love is just complicated. The most destructive pattern is using victimhood as leverage. When consequences draw near, emotion becomes armor. Tears, shutdown, panic, or dramatic overwhelm move center stage. The story stops being about what they did and becomes entirely about how much they're suffering. And in many cases, this isn't a calculated performance, it's automatic. Their nervous system has learned that distress reduces accountability. So the man who tried to address the issue ends up comforting the person who created it, feeling guilty for even bringing it up. Notice what rarely gets confronted in these patterns. The simple question, what was my part in this? That question is avoided because it leads straight to ownership. And ownership threatens systems built on attention, drama, and emotional escape. Not every woman operates this way. Many are capable of deep self-reflection and genuine repair. But when you ignore recurring patterns out of fear, infatuation, or wishful thinking, they don't fade. They intensify. You're not being kind by tolerating them. You're teaching that there are no real consequences for staying the same. What makes all of this so powerful isn't just individual behavior. It's the environment that routinely rewards it. Look at how conflict is often handled socially. When a woman is questioned, especially in public or in a group, there's an almost automatic pivot toward protecting her feelings. The assumption quickly becomes, she must be being treated unfairly. When a man raises a concern or a boundary, the spotlight tends to land on his tone, his timing, or his supposed motives long before anyone examines the facts. He's told to be more patient, more understanding, more emotionally tuned in. Her emotional reaction becomes the main data point. This lopsided response doesn't happen by accident. Over years, many women understandably pick up on something important. If a disagreement escalates, the culture is likely to take their side emotionally, even if their choices weren't entirely clean. Expression of hurt is validated first, responsibility is examined later, if at all. Once that pattern is internalized, it subtly changes how conflict is approached. If you know, consciously or not, that tears, anger, or withdrawal will bring support and soften scrutiny, it's tempting to lean on those moves when you feel cornered. Accountability starts to feel optional because there's usually a landing pad waiting. Friends, online narratives, and wider cultural messaging all echo a similar theme. If you're uncomfortable, someone is probably doing something wrong to you. The idea that discomfort might sometimes be the result of your own behavior is rarely emphasized with the same intensity. Now look at the effect on men. Through trial and error, a lot of men learn that speaking up carries a high cost. Say how something actually felt, and you risk being branded insensitive. Hold your boundary, and you may be accused of controlling or not being supportive. Push for clarity, and suddenly you're the villain in the story. So many men choose the path of least resistance. They go quiet. They apologize first. They absorb responsibility that isn't theirs, not from agreement, but from exhaustion. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more men back down, the more justified some women feel in avoiding accountability. The more accountability is avoided, the heavier the emotional load men silently carry. Eventually, responsibility barely exists in the relationship at all. One person is cushioned from consequences, the other is constantly adjusting and overfunctioning. That isn't emotional safety, it's imbalance. When someone is consistently insulated from consequences, their behavior usually doesn't soften. It escalates. Manipulation doesn't always begin as a conscious scheme. It grows out of whatever reliably works. If framing yourself as the wounded one repeatedly reduces pressure, that storyline starts to feel like the only way to stay safe. But a system that removes accountability doesn't create kindness. It creates slow, corrosive forms of abuse, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious. And men who keep telling themselves that silence is the mature option end up living in dynamics that erode their self-respect, one compromise at a time. Here's the part many men would rather not look at, even though it's crucial. All of this conditioning, all of these social double standards don't fully function without your cooperation. A lot of the fuel comes from men who genuinely believe they're being loving, patient, or emotionally evolved. Underneath that is a specific fear, the fear of being labeled controlling, harsh, or unempathetic. And deeper than that, the fear of losing her if you actually stand your ground. So you soften, you explain, you talk yourself out of what your gut is telling you. You apologize just to move past the tension, even when you didn't create the issue. You see patterns that bother you, but you tell yourself she just had a rough week, a painful past, or a valid reason. You keep granting exceptions while quietly hoping the behavior will fix itself. But every time you do that, you're not teaching compassion. You're teaching that there are no meaningful consequences for crossing your lines. Most men can point to a specific moment when they felt a line get crossed. You feel your chest tighten, your jaw clench, a clear internal no. But instead of naming it, you swallow it and say, "It's okay, I understand," even though you don't. That moment matters. From then on, accountability hasn't just been missing, it's been replaced. Replaced by you managing her emotions, absorbing the discomfort, doing the repair work she should be doing for herself. Accountability cannot exist where real outcomes never change. If nothing shifts when a boundary is ignored, the message is simple. The boundary was a suggestion, not a standard. In that kind of environment, deflection isn't malicious strategy, it's just the path of least resistance. Why own your part if you never have to? This doesn't mean you need to become cold, cruel, or hyper-confrontational, but it does mean recognizing that silence is not neutral. It sends a message about what you will and won't live with. Reintroducing accountability into your relationships isn't about dominance, it's about structure. 3 elements have to be present: timing, boundaries, and consequences. Miss anyone and the whole thing collapses. Timing means you address things close to when they happen, before resentment piles up. If you wait weeks, your frustration leaks into the conversation and the focus shifts from behavior to your emotion. Calm, immediate feedback feels normal. Delayed explosions feel negotiable or unfair. Boundaries are not rules for her. They are clarity about you. This is what I accept. This is what I don't. No lectures, no heavy moralizing, just simple statements of fact about your limits. If you can't clearly describe what crosses the line for you, you can't expect anyone to recognize when they're over it. And when a boundary is crossed, consequences are what give your words weight. Not punishment, not revenge, just predictable outcomes. Less access, less intimacy, more distance, or in serious cases, stepping away entirely. The key is emotional composure. The moment you start arguing feelings or begging to be understood, you've already lost the frame. You don't need agreement, you need consistency. Women who are capable of genuine self-respect will adjust to clear standards. They may push back at first, but they adapt. Women who rely on avoidance will escalate, test harder, or exit the situation. Either way, you win because reality reveals itself. Accountability doesn't destroy good relationships. It destroys illusions. Illusions that love means enduring anything. Illusions that patience means swallowing disrespect. Illusions that silence somehow keeps things stable. Real connection only exists where both people are willing to own their part. When one person is always shielded from consequences and the other is always expected to carry them, that's not love. That's imbalance dressed up as devotion. Your job isn't to fix women. Your job is to stop placing yourself in positions that require you to abandon your own standards to keep someone else comfortable.